Hey, welcome back, Faithful Politics listeners and viewers. If you are watching us on your brand spanking new $3,500 Apple Vision Pro goggles, I am your political host, Will Wright, and Josh is unable to be with us today. So instead, we brought back our favorite guest host, Corinna Lain. How's it going, Corinna?
Going well. I'm happy to be here.
And our returning guest is Bob Deitz. Oh man, did I?
Yes.
Oh, good, nailed it. All right, so he's a professor in the Schar School of Policy and Government at George Mason University. Previously, he served as a top lawyer for the director of the CIA and was the general counsel at the NSA, where he represented the NSA in all legal matters. He also held positions as acting general counsel at the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency. I'm going to have to ask you what that's all about. And then also as acting deputy general at the Department of Defense. So welcome back, Bob.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, Will.
Hey,
Yeah.
Will, before we get started, and I just have to say, I was looking at his bio. He also clerked for 3 different Supreme Court justices. And I don't know if that was at the same time or in seriatim or how he did that. But as a law professor, I'm just going to say, wow. So I just had to add that. He did that too.
Thanks, Corinna. It's a matter of luck, as you know.
Well,
That's
it's not all luck.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I was going to say, Bob, that you actually, if you're on the program for 3 more times, then you get to guest host. So,
I was hoping for, a politics or faithful politics game.
one is in the works. We've got a contract with Hasbro right now, so more to follow. But anyway, so we are here today to discuss something that I'm sure people are really, really tired of hearing about, and that's Trump, and specifically the Trump indictment arraignment that just occurred. The 49-page document that was just released is a pretty easy read. So if you haven't had a chance to read it yet, I definitely encourage all of you guys to take a look at it. I'll put the link in the show notes. But Bob, I've got to ask you, like, give us kind of your hot take, your big picture takeaway
Sure.
on the indictment.
Sure. This is different from any criminal indictment I've ever seen before. Now, I defer to Professor Lain. She was a prosecutor. I saw a fair number of indictments when I was in my law practice. We had a white-collar practice, and I sometimes consulted. But I've never seen an indictment like this. This indictment actually looks, to me, much more like the civil complaint a large corporation with very good lawyers would file against another corporation or perhaps against the federal government. And let me explain what I mean by that. If you look at it, the first 75 paragraphs are background. They're telling the story. Probably 90% of that was absolutely unnecessary from a legal standpoint. It's only then when you get to paragraph 76 and then through 96, in other words, 20 paragraphs, you get to the heart of the indictment. Now, so what's that about? I have a theory. This is nothing but a theory that, first of all, the prosecutor is very, very good at what he does. But I think what he was doing was aiming this at a very broad audience. He was aiming it certainly at Trump, but he was also, I think, aiming it at the American people, at the MAGA true believers, and I think also, by the way, at the Supreme Court. What he was doing, I think, was laying out this in such great detail that anybody reading it would say, wow, there's really something to this. And you notice last week, I think it was William Barr, the former AG, said that he thought Mr. Trump was toast. Meaning, again, reading this such a carefully written story. And so that's my first, that's kind of my first impression of all this.
Got it.
I'll just add, I think Rob's exactly right. I think the storytelling was masterful. And
Agreed.
It does read different than a typical indictment, which is all about the charges. I mean, the indictment is the charging document. As he said, they didn't need to tell a story. So why tell a story? You know, and if you're going to give facts, why tell it in the way that they did? It is an incredibly well told story that I think is for the American public. And I think that Jack Smith knew that there would be claims that this was political. And so he really needed to convince, you know, he knew I need to put the goods out there. I need to show them, because anybody who reads it, it's just like, wow. It's quite something. It's hard in fact, as far as I can tell, the MAGA crowd, they don't have a response. And so they're just not reading it and not talking about what's in it, because it's really hard to defend that.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Agreed.
And I guess I'm wondering, so, you know, I'm the only non-lawyer on the call, and most of the folks that I interact with on a daily basis are non-lawyers. So when I'm trying to explain the severity of, you know, this indictment based off my layman understanding of law, like how should I go about reading it? Because I mean, you know, so we are a podcast that talks about faith and politics, and one of the things that we do when we talk to a lot of theologians, you know, especially about reading the Bible and stuff, you know, they always say, well, read the Bible kind of in context. And there's a lot of imagery, a lot of, you know, metaphors used. But then some people would say, okay, well, notice how they use this particular word in Greek and Hebrew and whatever. So in the report, I see a lot of words that to me, you know, seem indicative of something, but I don't really quite know what that something is. Like there's a phrase, there's like a sentence in there that says like Trump caused scores of boxes, you know, many of which contain classified documents. So like that word caused, is that important, or am I just reading way too much into this?
You're making a very good point. When I teach con law to undergrads, I tell them that they've got to look at the language and then look beneath the language, because a lot of this, it's not really exactly a metaphor. But there are tone issues that Smith is making very clear. The sentence you talked about, he caused something, that's basically legalese to say, I didn't do it myself, but I had somebody else do it for me. You see this a lot on the service of process. You know, when I'd file a brief, I would say, I caused this brief to be served on Joe Schmo. Didn't mean I actually mailed the goddamn, I'm sorry. It doesn't mean I actually mailed the thing. It means I had a gopher mail it for me. That's what the caused thing means.
Hey, Bob, I'd love to ask a question, and I just I love that we have you in. By the way, I've been looking forward to this all week, so I'm glad to be here.
Thank you so much.
I mean, but just given all of the experience that you have, I'm wondering if you could talk about the national security piece of this.
Sure.
Because I think there's two different framings. You know, one framing I've heard is, come on, this is just about documents, you know, and maybe he even declassified them, you know, but this is just about like taking or keeping or maybe misplacing documents, and a Records Act. And then other people are saying, no, actually, this is more about national security. So I'm just wondering if you could talk about that aspect of it.
Sure, I'd be happy to. You know, the last time I was in this program, we talked about classification levels. And remember, Will, we talked about SCIFs. How all classified documents have to be kept in a SCIF. I think one of the clever things that the prosecutor did here was include photographs. To me, it's incredibly damning having boxes of classified documents sitting on a stage at Mar-a-Lago, and then a picture of documents that had fallen out of a box, and you can see I remember I talked about candy stripes, the covered that goes on classified documents. You can see those there in the picture. And you notice in the complaint or in the indictment, there's a reference to a place that had access from many different locations.
Yeah.
What that's doing is saying, look, this isn't something minor and technical. You've got all these country club members wandering around. And I'll tell you, I know if I were in a country club, not that I've ever been in one, but if I ever were in a country club and I walked past a room that had candy striped covers on the floor, I'd go in and open up and look at that, see what the hell was inside them. Just curiosity. And I think what it was trying to do was show exactly what you were referring to, Corinna, that these aren't minor technical, he put it in the wrong drawer, or he should have had a safe that had 6 numbers and not 3. It wasn't anything like that. It was saying this was just sheer sloppiness. And I think that's what that was about. With respect to, you notice there are there are 31 counts of retention of classified documents. That's, meaning 1 for each document. There were plenty more. And I think he chose these look, this is a guess. I shouldn't say I think. Mm-hmm. I'm guessing that these documents were chosen particularly because they are so damning to the defense. Meaning, a document about war plans. My gosh, war plans are a really big deal to the Pentagon.
Yeah.
Do you think that also poses unique, if that's the case, do you think that poses unique challenges in the prosecution? I mean, how do you deal with the highest of top secret documents, nuclear plans, war plans, all of that sort of thing? How do you do that with a jury? How do you do that without compromising? What are do you know of anything about that side?
Yeah, sure. Look, that raised the issue of gray mail. There was a very, very good first-rate defense lawyer in D.C. who made his living defending document theft cases, because what he would do is he'd say to the prosecutors, hey, you got this indictment here, but, we're going to have to go into great detail in cross-examination, and you guys don't want all these secrets spilled, so why don't we come to a nice compromise and we'll reduce charges for a guilty plea? As a result of, particularly this one fellow, but others, there was a thing called the Classified Information Procedures Act, or something like that, CIPA. Mm-hmm. And basically what you do is the prosecution lawyer and the defense lawyer go in chambers to the judge, and they show the document, and the defense lawyer can ask any questions he wants about its provenance. But then when they go back out into the open courtroom, that issue can no longer be discussed or is not talked about publicly. So that's a way of addressing this gray mail kind of problem. And it works. It's used quite frequently.
That's really interesting. So I mean, like, could Trump or the defense, state that, the jury is basically making a decision, on a matter where they don't have the full, the full picture, or is what you just discussed sort of, kind of just part and parcel to this type of,
I think that's pretty settled. I think that's all pretty settled. In other words, Trump can say, and believe me, I'm making this up. I have no idea what these are in these documents.
Sure.
But let's say it's war plans against England. I'm picking obviously an absurd example because I don't want people listening to this say, "Oh my God, I just learned something incredibly important." But defense counsel couldn't say, "Well, let's talk about those war plans a little bit." How many airplanes? How many bombs? You can't do any of that. And so so what the jury knows is that this is a properly classified information document, and that's been established in camera. in the judge's chambers. So when they go back out, that issue's no longer on the table.
Bob, I think, and I know that you were surmising, we're all just sort of surmising in some ways. You just do it from a depth of experience. And so that's great.
Or I'm just making it up on the fly.
Well, I love that. That's what good trial lawyers do. But, I think that the other benefit of choosing the documents that they did, assuming that they are particularly damning, might also be for Judge Cannon or for, whatever judge they thought that they would draw. Yeah. Because even if the jury doesn't see those documents, it's going to, there are a number of discretionary rulings, as you know, and it could affect how the judge, does the judge see this as, oh my gosh, this is super serious here? Yeah. Or does the judge see it as, okay, fine, he violated the law, but they're out to get Trump?
That's a great argument. I did not think about that, but you're dead right. It's one thing everybody claims, and it's probably true, that the federal government overclassifies, and so by choosing these really hot documents, you're right. It's a judge is going to look at this and not say, "Oh, come on, everybody knows that. Why is that classified?" With the documents that Smith chose, you're going to look at those documents and say, "Good grief, these are really important issues."
And he mentions that in the storytelling. He talks about nuclear codes and susceptibilities of our own. Yep. And so that there is hot stuff in there.
Exactly.
Will, I know you have questions, but I just want to sneak in one more if you don't mind.
Go ahead.
I mean, as long as we're as long as we're surmising, I had two more surmises that I was curious about. One was, you mentioned a lawyer in D.C. that is known for gray mailing and known for, doing high quality, high end defense on cases like this, perhaps. Yep. And it raised the question in my mind about Trump and Trump's lawyers.
Oh, good. I'm so glad.
We had to get here.
Say something about that.
Right? I want you to. And I guess, as I sit back, I'm like, it's interesting to me that Trump, not only that several of Trump's lawyers have said, that's enough for us, but that he can't find a lawyer. Because if you think about it, I mean, lawyers will represent, and I mean, I think this is a good part of my profession. I don't think it's a bad part, but they'll represent terrible people, and or people who have done terrible things. I mean, at least put it that way. No one's irredeemable, but spoken as a death penalty scholar. But and the more salient, the more high profile, the better, because a really good lawyer can make a name off that, right? So there's personal gratification, and then you're set, right? And especially if, as Trump claims, he's innocent, he's done nothing wrong. I mean, what lawyer doesn't want to be Atticus Finch and coming in and saying you got this all wrong and you're persecuting and and so it's just very curious to me that he hasn't been able to get a lawyer. I wonder about the lawyer that you are thinking about in DC. I wonder how far the search has been, and I just wondered your thoughts.
Sure. No, I'm so glad you raised it. And you're making some good points there. I think I've got two comments. First, during the first impeachment of Trump, there were numerous top layer lawyers in DC who would not represent him.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Oh, yes.
Interesting. Okay.
And, bear in mind, Trump doesn't take his lawyer's advice and he stiffs them for payment. What's not to like in a client like that, right? So he's had a difficult time. The second point I wanted to raise about that, and I think it's connected to the first point I just made, is that I've read in the Post or the Times, I can't remember which, that there's a division within his lawyers/advisors about the shape of his defense. There's one group apparently that wants a scorched earth. This is selective prosecution. What about Hillary? What about Joe Biden's son? And, that kind of thing. And then there's the other camp, which is a traditional legal defense. And that has, apparently, according to these articles, that has not been resolved. Now, I don't know what kind of, I know I, as a lawyer, would never go for the scorched earth. I'm not even sure any of that stuff's admissible.
I teach evidence, and I'm
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
I don't think
Exactly.
that's just...
Exactly right. And that's exactly what I'm picturing myself standing up in front of a federal judge trying to get in this kind of baloney. And what I would do, aside from kill myself, when the lawyer tells me to sit down and shut up. By contrast, of course, you and I both understand how a traditional defense would work.
Yeah, that's so interesting. So with your experience in the national security universe, I'm curious if you can kind of put into context what I thought, and I think a lot of the reporters covering this thought was probably one of the most damning paragraphs, and that was paragraph number 3, I believe, where it talked about the classified documents could put at risk the national security of the United States, foreign relations, the safety of the military, and human sources. So kind of put that into context, drawing from your experience in that world. What does that really mean?
Well, yeah, I mean, I agree. It is an arresting paragraph. And again, I think the audience for this was the American people. Hey, this isn't some technical, I put it in the wrong file drawer kind of case. The ones that were mentioned, order of battle. When you fight a war, how do you do it? What equipment do you bring in first? What troops do you bring in first? What does the Navy do compared to the Army, compared to the Air Force? That stuff is just incredibly important. And it's information that, by the way, the U.S. has on many, let's call them aggressive countries. These are often called the crown jewels in the intel world. Putting what's called human sources at risk. These are people that risk their lives to give us information, and then they get betrayed because a box fell open in Mar-a-Lago and a classified document fell out. I mean, how do you attract human sources if we care so little about their lives?
Bob, there was a story that came out, I don't know, was it 2020? It was in the last couple of years about foreign agents or, undercover agents working for us, dying, being uncovered at an alarming rate. I think there was an article maybe in the Washington Post or in one of the major news sources about that. Did you see that, and if you did, do you think that that's related in any way? Do you think that some of this information has already? Of course, we're just surmising, but do you think?
Yeah, not directly, but I know what you're talking about, and I think you know more than you remember you're knowing. You saw that Robert Hansen died in the last couple of weeks. He was the guy at the FBI who was acting as an agent for Russia. And what began the lengthy inquiry into who was doing this was that we were losing agents in Russia at an alarming rate. And so people back in Washington like, whoa, what's going on here? And that's when that long investigation began. But it took a number of years. Bear in mind, this may be, what do the kids call this, TMI? Yeah,
Yes.
This may be TMI. But there are sort of two kinds of agents. There's what are called official cover agents. And they're people that work for the agency, but when they go overseas, they're posted to the State Department.
Hmm.
And that's their day job. And they actually do a day job. But then at night, that's when they do all the sort of tricky stuff. When they get caught, they're what's called PNG, persona non grata. They're tossed from the country. You know, most people don't particularly care about vacationing in Vladivostok. So that's not a big deal.
Yeah.
The bad ones are what are called NOCs, non-official cover. And when those guys get caught, they're likely to be killed.
Mm.
And those are the ones one is particularly concerned about identifying.
Interesting. Yeah. So kind of in that same vein, I'm wondering how much of that applies with my next question, because I want to ask you a little bit more about the classifications, because I know the last time you were on, you helped us sort of sort through secret, top secret, confidential.
Yep.
But there is like a whole bunch more types of classifications that are on those documents in the charges
They're not classifications.
Got it. Okay.
There are various phrases that are added on no foreign.
Mm-hmm.
You can't show this to foreigners outside the so-called Five Eyes, the English-speaking England, U.S., Canada, New Zealand, and Australia. Those are the Five Eyes. But no foreign means you can't show it to anybody other than the U.S.
Got it.
Then there are the Five Eyes classification. You can't show it beyond the Five Eyes. And then there's the thing called ORCON. That's originator controlled, meaning if I create a document and I put ORCON on it and send it to you, you can review it, but you in turn can't pass it on to anybody else without first consulting me. So they are classifications. They're just sort of controlling. They're the rules of the game.
Got it. And what's SAP?
SAP.
Or SCI? Those were a couple other ones.
Those are the SCI. It's the code word stuff.
Okay, got it.
In other words, it's top secret, but then there's, in addition, you need to be read into that compartment. It's secret compartmented information. That's SDI.
Got it. Okay.
So you've got a top secret clearance, but that doesn't, just because you have a top secret clearance doesn't mean you can roam around and looking at stuff. Often you need to be read into specific programs. When I left DOD, I spent roughly a day being read out of programs. And basically saying, you can no longer see this stuff or talk about it. And by the way, if you do, you're going to lose your firstborn child.
Sounds pretty severe.
Depends on the child, I suppose.
How about like there was other things where it's like not the characteristics or the classification level, but there's something that just said like redacted or no markings or something like that. So
yeah.
why would they have the redacted on the characteristics of the classification?
Well, I mean, this is speculation. Do you remember last time we talked, Will, about the above and below the line? If you remember, I mentioned that the classified documents have a whole bunch of stuff at the top, which is, I've never even asked about it, but I think it's the way it's filed or maybe where it came from, or there's all sorts of code letters. The meat, and then above that also says something like, the below information came from a source who's provided accurate information for the last 5 years. That's called above the line. Below the line, I find myself gesturing here, and you can't even see me. I don't know why I'm gesturing. It's like I'm in front of a classroom of nothing. Not that you're nothing, of course. Below the dotted line, that's where the meat is. And I suspect that they may have redacted some of that meat. This is raw speculation.
Sure.
Bob, speaking about these documents in this way, I wondered, again, as long as we're surmising, I wonder if you have thoughts about why.
Oh, God, I'm so glad you did this.
Well, because one of the most striking things, at least to me, and here's another question for you. What was the most shocking part of the indictment for you, as a national security expert? But for me, I think one of the most disturbing things was that he obstructed. That he didn't want to give the documents back. He told his lawyers, "Hey, isn't it better if we didn't?" Then when they said, "We can't do that," he was like, "Okay, well, come on this day," and got someone to take the boxes away, and so that the lawyers wouldn't be able to see everything and would inevitably fill out a false certification that they had checked everything, which of course is what happened. But that's a lot of effort, and people don't do that for nothing, right? It wasn't for nothing. So do you have any thoughts about why he had that stuff?
I do, and I'm not sure they're very persuasive, because I asked myself the same thing. All of us, I think, who are rational beings, we like to know why. And when somebody does something that seems on its face to be destructive, self-destructive, you always want to know, why'd you do that? Excuse me.
Well, and it was so purposeful.
Yeah.
It was
First of all,
he went
I
to
have to say
lengths.
on the side that I'm not sure all the lawyers were quite as innocent as lambs as you as a lawyer are suggesting they were. I think there was enough winking and nodding going on that maybe some of them might have thought that, oh yeah, that box, gee, maybe it did slide over someplace else. But in any event, setting that aside, when this first broke, I asked myself the same question. How could somebody forget what he did with the National Archives? He's probably saying, oh, they're a bunch of weenies. Who cares about that? But when the Department of Justice starts asking, and then you get a subpoena.
Exactly.
Subpoenas for most people make your knees turn to jelly. And here's a guy. Here's a guy who says, yeah, meh, or what do the kids say, meh? And I have this is as I think I mentioned last show, Will. This is a wild blank guess.
Sure.
It's a term from the Pentagon. I wondered whether this was an investment by Trump for potential use down the road. There have been stories about his grumbling about how his son-in-law has monetized his government experience with the Saudis to the tune of a billion or so.
$2 billion.
Yeah.
$2 billion. Yeah, come on, $2 billion. Who cares? Yeah.
Yeah.
I couldn't help wondering whether this would have been a useful tool. Some of these documents might have been a useful tool in negotiating with Mr. Putin.
I have mind meld.
Emphasize to your listeners, this is nothing but raw speculation.
Sure.
No, but just knowing Trump as we do, he is an absolutely transactional person.
Yes.
He's transactional, and to the extent there's emotion, it's vindictive and and just childish.
Agreed.
But this was strategic, and he had to go through efforts, move stuff and move it back, and so there is a purpose, because you had to do things.
Agreed.
And I've wondered that too. I just think he's just such a transactional person. And with no loyalty that I can tell.
Agreed.
To anyone or anything other than himself. So it's interesting. I've wondered, did he already have plans? Is there something about that golf course, Saudi deal? Is that stuff already on its way out the door? Does Putin have, compromat on him, as people say? Is it about that? Is it about an investment, in the future of
Yep.
I'm just going to keep these? I just, none of those are good answers.
No, I agree. And I would guess, by the way, that the odds of the Russians having compromat on Trump, the odds approach 100%.
Yeah.
I think I may have mentioned, I can't remember, Willis, if I mentioned the last time, but I was there was a Western European country that I was visiting a fair amount, and every time I went there, there was a hotel that the American embassy approved as falling within the financial range that's acceptable. And so I always stayed at this hotel, and it's convenient to the embassy. I went there 4 or 5 times, and every time I got the same room. Now,
Wow.
as much as I've traveled in this country, I've never gotten the same room in any hotel I've ever stayed at.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, after the second or third time, I began looking around, to see where's the camera.
Yeah.
The odds of the Russians having Trump on tape are, I think, exceedingly high.
Yeah, that's so scary. So, I only have one question regarding Walty Nauta, which I think I said this last name right. So he is listed as Trump's co-conspirator. Based on what you know about DOJ, like, is there any value in them trying to get him to
Absolutely.
flip? There is.
Yeah, well, flipping's one thing, but the other point about a conspiracy is once you've proven a conspiracy, all the evidence that comes in about one guy applies to everybody.
Interesting. Yeah.
So that you get all this trashy dirt on Waltina?
Waltine. Yeah, like I've been saying it like Waltine, like saltine crackers.
Saltine, yeah.
Yeah.
But you get anything on him gets admitted against Trump.
Interesting. Yeah, and there's probably no desire to get Trump to flip on Waltine, right? Because Trump's the bigger fish.
No, I think the odds of that offer happening are approached zero.
So Nada's in a really interesting and tight spot.
You think?
I think of like what was her Cassidy? I can't remember what
Hutchinson.
Hutchinson. Where if you're in that inner circle,
Yeah.
there's a certain amount of protection that if you leave, Trump will call the MAGA dogs on you and will really come after you. And I think January 6th has shown us all people are willing to kill for him. People are willing to go to great lengths at Trump's direction. And so I think, I do think it's really interesting for him is, do you think that he'd be willing? Because I think if he doesn't flip, he's going down.
I agree with that, and I think you're raising a really important issue. One of the things that I find so striking about Trump, and this is another reason, by the way, that I think he has a hard time finding lawyers, is that virtually everybody who's associated with him gets tarred. Look at Rudy Giuliani. I mean, when he was so-called America's mayor, on 9/11, he was widely admired and widely respected. And I'm told that he did a reasonably good job when he was the prosecutor in the Southern District of New York. Now his reputation is just shredded, and I can't help feeling sorry for Nauta, whatever. that this poor guy was elevated. Oh my God! Now I'm the valet to the President of the United States. Is this cool or what? And now he's in this incredibly difficult bind.
Yeah, and like with Trump lawyer number 3, like whoever that person is, I suspect maybe it's like Christina Bobb or whoever, but
My guess as well.
Yeah, the report said, that she signed the document saying that yep everything's good to go, and I'm just like thinking, why in the world would you sign something to confirm that everything's been checked?
Agreed.
Especially with like this particular client, but like is Trump lawyer number 3 in any sort of legal jeopardy, or do you think that they are one of the DOJ's witnesses?
No, look, as good as the odds of her being disbarred are very high. Look, I know I never did this kind of work, but corporate lawyers, when they're doing a merger and the sale includes, 75 trucks, a junior, very, very junior lawyer goes out and actually counts the trucks. You never take the word of anybody for stuff like that. Maybe your senior partner or something, but a client type or some lawyer from a different firm, never. And the fact that she signed on to that is, I find astonishing, actually, unless she was under pressure from somebody who said, "Hey, kid, just sign this darn thing."
Like Trump?
Maybe, yeah.
So sort of related to that, I wonder if we could talk a little bit about witness tampering and witness intimidation.
Yeah.
Just because Trump is known for that very sort of thing. And I thought it was very interesting that after the arraignment, Trump goes to this, he walks out, and it is not like hanging back to be with his own attorneys. He's following in the Trump, in this Trump line that's going out, and he's essentially, with Trump.
Yeah.
Do you think that Trump will violate the terms of his agreement with tweets or Truth Social or whatever?
That's a great question. I mean, who knows? But my sense is the way this is being done semi-legitimately is that you pay for the guy's lawyer.
Yeah.
And, this was done with a couple of witnesses during the January 6th hearing on the Hill. You will pay for your attorney. And by the way, your attorney tells you what you're supposed to do. And that's not witness tampering, but,
Interesting. Yeah, because kind of in that same line of thinking, I mean, the transcripts from the hearing, showed, I mean, there seemed to have been a long conversation about the kinds of conversations you can have with certain people, and they eventually settled on, okay, you can't talk about the case with the witnesses that the DOJ are going to provide or what have you. And but like what counts as discussions about the case? I mean, like I sent Corinna a text from Trump's Truth Social that he did just, I don't know, yesterday or something like that, talking about the boxes, being illegally taken from his home. He cited like the Fourth Amendment, and I'm just like, would that count? There's Bob.
Hello.
Sorry. You like my tie?
Yeah, it's very nice.
You tipped me off early on. There was a little slide on the camera.
Oh, well.
Hey,
Yeah.
Will, I warned you, I'm not Mr. IT.
It's okay. No,
Great.
I'm not offended. It's good to see your face.
Yeah, it is. That's great. Well, hello.
Yeah, hiya, thanks.
Right. Yeah, no, but the question is kind of the one that I was trying to get to also, is what kind of trouble can he get into, do you think, with that Truth Social? Because he's a loose cannon.
It's contempt of court. It's contempt of court. And the odds are nobody will do anything about it. And partly because I shouldn't say I suspect, that sounds like I actually know what I'm talking about. I'm guessing that Smith will say, this guy is killing himself. Let's let him. Do you remember he trashed, excuse me, Trump trashed the judge in New York. He has trashed Smith as being psychotic or something. I mean, he's really
Deranged. Yeah.
Yeah, deranged, I think it was.
Deranged. You're exactly right. And to my mind, if I'm Smith, I'm sitting there saying, "Yeah, keep it up, bud. This is really, this is really helping you a lot." And the judge, remember, there's always. Oh, that was another thing. I'm sorry, I'm jumping around, but I'm so excited to see my picture up here. I can hardly contain myself. A number of people have asked me why I thought Smith brought this case in Florida rather than D.C., where venue was also appropriate. And I think there are a couple of reasons. Sort of on the tactical level, I think Smith wants this to go to trial quickly and not get hung up on venue issues and being challenged. But I think a better argument, or a more important factor for Smith, is that let's take this to the lion's den.
Yeah.
Let's take this to your home court, with all your those MAGA well, I shouldn't say MAGA appointments. The Trump judge appointments.
Yeah.
Let's go in there and try this case. And I think that's really what was going on there. And I think Smith's saying, "Hey, say anything you want about me. That's not going to help you." And his lawyers, I'm sure, Trump's lawyers are all cringing, I would think.
Yeah.
I think you're right. And Bob, I think it goes back to being like, I don't know, in the 5th grade or 6th grade with bullies. He's like, I'm not afraid of you.
Right.
I am coming for you. It's a bold move. It's a confident move.
Yeah.
And I think Trump is, I think he really is scared, and the way he reacts to that is with his bluster. And so you can,
I met Smith once or maybe twice.
Oh, really?
Just met. I mean, and when I saw him, I was told I was going to be meeting this guy who's, prosecutor in the Hague and all that. When I saw, just seeing this guy scared the hell out of me. And
he's like a Jedi Knight.
Does he look like a nice guy?
No.
Does he look like somebody who actually pets dogs and kitty cats? It would strike terror in me.
Yeah. Speaking of venue, I mean, like, why wasn't like New Jersey an option, or is that something that you think could happen later down the road?
Oh, well, it could, but because of the Bedminster connection.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no. I mean, yes, it could have. It would be proper there, but it would certainly invite a lengthy legal argument, including an appeal. And then if Trump were to lose an attempt to get certiorari in the Supreme Court, in other words, delaying, which is Trump's, his game is to, play out the clock.
Yes. I mean, that's why I think that was so brilliant. In part, it's psychological warfare, I think.
Yeah.
I'm going to bring it right to Miami. But the other is it takes away like 2 or 3 moves on the chessboard. It's like, wait a minute, my next move was going to be a change of venue. This is how we drag it out. We're going to fight about venue. And it's like, you want to change venue to D.C.?
Yeah,
I don't think
exactly.
you do. If you do, we'll agree to it.
Yeah, good luck with the jury in D.C. They love you.
Right, exactly, right? Like, so it just shortened that whole time. Bob, one question I had is, do you think that Judge Cannon will stay with this case? I know that there's a lot of calls for her to, to recuse herself. So I wonder if you have thoughts about that. And then, the other thing that I've been wondering is it the case that she might just go the other way? In part, in other words, she might just bend. She made some pretty wacky rulings the first go around, but
you think?
Right? But she got slapped down, and everyone's looking at her, and so I wonder if she might. And plus the gravity of it, I wonder. Do you think she'll be fair? What do you think are the dynamics that are going to play out there, and do you think she'll stay with the case?
Yeah, that's a great question. This is, again, we're speculating, raw speculation. I think she'll stay with it, in part because without knowing her at all, and really even knowing nothing more than is in the newspaper, there's a matter of pride. And she was slapped down so badly, so completely, that had to have been an embarrassment for her, in her own mind, but also among her colleagues. And people that are in that position are people that have egos. And so I think it may turn out that she has had her, her moment of saying, look, let's get this right, and we'll do it well, and may even favor the government in certain contexts.
I've wondered that.
This is, everybody, maybe you don't because you're too young.
You're talking to Will, I think.
Judge Sirica. You remember, Watergate judge. Everybody knew his name. He was famous. Just as a district court judge who wouldn't accept guilty pleas from those folks that were caught in the, at the Watergate hotel. Or actually, it was the across the street hotel. It was the Howard Johnson, but he became famous, and I suspect this judge, again, she's got her pride, her vanity, may say, no, I'm going to do this right because people are going to know who I am, and I don't want to be thought of as a tool for a disgraced politician.
Yeah.
At the same time, she has the potential of offering him great protection, right? Like, she could dismiss charges. She can set a late a trial date. She can do all sorts of passive aggressive things to help him.
She can.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, I've got to ask you guys a question. Who's the Trump female adverted to toward the end of the indictment?
The family member, you mean?
Yeah.
Uh,
It's a female family member, so that kind of limits the field.
It sure does.
I'm going with Laura Trump.
I always thought it was I always thought it was Melania. But I mean, I don't know, and I'm not watching that close enough. I just always think, whenever I think of Melania, even to this day, I think of her right after the news was Stormy Daniels came out, and he went to grab her hand and she smacked it. Remember that?
Yeah, I do.
And she got caught. It was like, and I just
very
thought,
much like the Elliot Spitzer did a scene with his wife when he was accused of hiring a prostitute or something, and I'm not sure whether she wouldn't appear with him, but it was clear that she was like, it's the appearance with a little woman, the little supportive woman. That's an endangered photo op.
Yeah. I think she, my own impression, of course I don't know her, but my impression is she's transactional too. I think they're both transactional.
No, really?
And her transactions look different.
Yeah.
But I think she's just, I don't even know if she'd be particularly sad.
Right.
No.
Yeah. I was. It's either Laura Trump or Kimberly Guilfoyle.
Okay.
Because I don't think it's Ivanka. And I don't think it's. I don't know.
You don't think it's Melania?
I don't think it's Melania.
You notice none of them seems to be playing much of a role these days. They're not terribly visible in the media.
Yeah. But to that end, I mean, like so, regardless of what family member it is, like, do they have any criminal culpability here as well? Just or are they likely to be one of the witnesses?
I'm guessing the latter.
Interesting. So Trump's going to know, though, right? Once the DOJ submits.
You asked this in a question. There's no parent-child privilege.
Nope.
No, just spousal.
Got it.
And even spousal has recognized exceptions.
Yeah, well, the fraud crime, yeah.
So.
No, William Barr. I don't think he distinguished himself terribly well as AG, but his description of Trump's position as being toast, I think he's dead right.
Yeah, I do too. I saw a clip of him, and I thought it was important that was he on Fox News? I feel like he was. It might have been CNN, but I thought it was Fox. But because I remember thinking, like, okay, well, maybe somebody will actually from Mega World will actually watch this. But when he was saying, he came right out and said, everyone's saying this is just a setup. No, he obstructed.
Right.
And it's all, he brought this on himself.
Yeah.
I talked to, as you might imagine, I talked to former colleagues in the intel world. And it's pretty clear to me that very early on, there was a sense that the president was not going to see the crown jewels.
Oh, interesting.
Bear in mind, he has the right to see anything, but you need to know what to ask for.
Yeah.
And it was very clear that DOD was not coming to his office with stacks of documents saying, "Hey, look at this new thing we can do." Because he's not trustworthy, and everybody knows he's not trustworthy.
Yeah, that's so interesting.
It's yet another example of how, in some ways, his presidency, we were just so lucky that he's not smart.
Yes,
He's just not particularly smart.
I'm
You
glad you
think
said
about
that. 'Cause
somebody,
I totally agree. I totally
Yeah.
you know,
agree. He
somebody
isn't
who knew.
smart. He's undereducated. Yeah.
Yeah. So I wanna get into. I have just a couple of audience questions.
Oh boy.
If you would just humor me, and I'm going to read these verbatim as
Yeah.
they
When's
were.
that left-wing pinko commie going to get the hell off your show, right?
Oh, I thought you were referring to me.
No. So the first question says, the president has unilateral declassification powers.
Yes.
I'm assuming we all agree there. There's no set procedure for him to declassify things that I'm aware of. If he can declassify at will, how can anyone make a legal case that he didn't do so? Please point to the process that legally sets the procedure to declassify documents.
The way the procedure works is when anybody, including the president, wants to declassify something, you go to the classifying authority. That is the one who put the marking on in the first place. And you say, I would like this declassified because, and it's widely known, it's been known for years, or whatever the reason is, and then it's done or it's not done. But there is a procedure. Telepathy is not declassification. The president can't sit there and say, declassified. That's not the way it works. Second, an ex-president has no declassification authority ever. And that's what and notice for all Trump's talk about his declassifying, his lawyers have never made that argument, which I find interesting.
And he was also caught on tape for whoever that audience met.
Yeah.
He was caught on tape saying, as president, I could have declassified this. Now I can't, but it's secret. See, look.
Yep.
So it's a talking point, but one that even Trump has himself admitted that he did not have that power.
That's why that's in that complaint, I think, or in the indictment.
I think you're right. I think you're right.
That's interesting. So, next question. So, will the Jack Teixeira and Trump cases pave the way for the DOJ to have to establish criminal intent when prosecuting 793E cases moving forward? If so, would this possibly create a legal opportunity for violations of the Espionage Act out of public interest?
Well, let me try to answer what I think the question is, and then you can say I'm so far out in left field, I'll never be seen again. Intent in the law almost never means, and perhaps never means, I meant to do something bad. All intention means is I intended to do what I did. You see what I'm saying? And so for intent purposes, if you don't need to prove that Trump wanted to do evil by having boxes shifted from here to there, all you need to show is that he intended to have those boxes moved from here to there, and that's the intent you need. There's a great Holmes line. It's one of my favorite quotes from him, that even a dog knows the difference between being stumbled over and being kicked.
Well done.
Isn't that a great quote?
That's a great quote. I would just add to that, and I agree with everything, that it depends on the statute, because when some statutes say with intent to defraud, with intent to this or that. So there are some statutes or knowingly and intentionally that add mens rea. And of course, I'm not really speaking to you, Bob, because you already know all this. But just for those
You're
who don't
flattering
have,
me, Corinna.
who don't have a law degree or haven't been to law school. But so there's a principle of law that's like when the statute wants a specific intent, it says so.
Yeah.
And so therefore it's ceteris paribus es exclusio unius or something like that.
Right.
But wow, I don't know where that came from. I think it's kind of right, but
did you just cast a spell or something?
Yeah, really, right? My Harry Potter one. But conviction. Sorry. But, absent that, when the statute does not say that, then there is no specific intent. It is, just as Bob said, it's you just meant to do what you did, and that was prohibitive conduct.
Okay, awesome. Well, all right, so next question. After looking at the charges against Trump, which one, if any, doesn't apply to Hillary Clinton's email server?
Oh, God.
And destruction of emails after
I didn't mean to say it out loud. I was just thinking it.
It's a narrative.
It's okay.
It's really good to talk
about.
Yeah.
So which one it doesn't apply to Hillary Clinton's email and destruction of emails after subpoena? I know, quote, but her emails is dismissed out of hand by many, but if Trump is being indicted for the same exact thing Clinton was excused for, there needs to be some substantial reason. Bob?
Well, for one thing, there were no purloined documents, I don't believe.
No.
There were discussions in emails. And by the way, I know what's going to happen, but and I know nothing I say can stop it, but I'm still going to say it. I'm not defending Hillary's conduct on this.
Sure.
When I joined NSA, we were told never, ever, ever use private emails. And I never did. And most people I know never did. It just wasn't done. So I'm not defending that at all. But it is different from having these hundreds of classified documents in your possession. And apparently, I don't know the facts terribly well, but apparently what Ms. Clinton did was often talk around a classified document in her emails, so that she didn't actually talk about the email or the classified information so much as saying, I'm making this up, of course, but Joe, do you remember that discussion we had last week about that certain problem? Okay, here are my thoughts about it. That kind of talking around the problem. Again, it doesn't cure the problem, and I'm not defending the conduct, but it's very different from having these hundreds of classified documents in your possession and moving them around to avoid their being found.
Yeah.
I think for me, that is really the key. And I mean, I think, as you say, there's two things. This is about classified documents. This is under the Espionage Act. She was never, ever considered, none of her emails ever came close to that because she wasn't keeping classified documents. But the bigger thing is, I don't think that, correct me if I'm wrong, Bob, but my understanding is that Trump is not charged with having wrongfully taken so much as he has been charged with wrongfully keeping and not and not complying with the subpoena and obstructing. That is very, very different.
But you're reminding me, Corinna, that a number of politicians have made something of the fact that this falls under an act called the Espionage Act, and there's no evidence that Trump was committing espionage. That's a complete red herring.
Yeah.
You can ask the numerous people that have stolen documents from NSA and kept them in their garage, for example, who are now in jail. You don't need these. It's simply possession. You don't need to have then decide to, sell them on eBay or pass them on to the Russians or something. You don't need any of that.
Yeah.
Interesting. So how about, so let's see, 1, 2, 3, fourth question. All cases with classified documents are conducted in secret courtrooms and... Oh, okay, good. So, and
that violates due process of law. We don't have secret courtrooms in this country. We're not living in Stalinist Russia. Sorry, I'm foaming at the mouth.
It's okay. Continuing, and all counsel
do this to me.
And all counsel has to obtain a security clearance to see evidence. Does Trump have the power to demand a 100% public trial?
Well, the answer is yes. Like all trials are public. Doesn't mean they're not in camera proceedings under the act I talked about earlier. But the trials are public, absolutely. And yes, his lawyers have to get clearances, but that's generally not an issue. Generally.
And I'll just say that the right to a public trial is like every other constitutional right. It's not absolute. And so you not only see in camera hearings, still a public trial, you see courts that limit the number. There was a case that just came out under the Fourth Circuit. It was a big conspiracy case with gang members, and the court limited the people to 25. And they made a public trial claim, and the court said, no, it's still public. There's all sorts of limitations that a trial court is well within its discretion to do as the circumstances demand it, as is reasonable, which in this case, you're going to see some of that.
Awesome. So will the Trump and Teixeira cases require the government to procure actual evidence of harm to national security directly related to their retention and disclosure of national defense information?
No, there doesn't have to be a declaration of World War III in order for these prosecutions to hold. Again, if you look at what was his name? It was a male, PFC Manning. I think his name's been changed to Chelsea.
Chelsea.
There was a couple recently lived in Annapolis who he took documents from NSA. None of those involved. You couldn't prove harm. That'd be an impossible burden. Absolutely impossible burden.
Interesting. So, last question
for your wallet. How do you prove harm?
Yeah, I guess that'd be hard, wouldn't it?
Yeah, well, as rich as you are, I would think so.
I'm just rolling in it. What can I say? Last audience question: is it possible that Trump could destabilize his base and effectively bully the DOJ into releasing the documents per the indictment to prove they were vital information and not overclassified pieces of paper?
In-camera proceedings, that's a good question. I think the answer is probably no, but you could, I suppose, challenge the classification of a document. But the problem is there are how many counts?
37, right? Total.
Yeah, there are 31. Yeah, but there are 31 specific documents that are mentioned. And that's why, again, I think that Smith chose his documents wisely. There's no way you're going to be able to show that the U.S. Order of battle isn't top secret. It's just not doable.
Got it. Okay, so I only just have one more question for you, Bob, and this is probably more of a procedural thing. When can we expect this to go to trial? And when and if it does, like what can we expect as far as like the timeline of how long the trial will last? Basically, like, is this going to go to trial after the election? Or do you think it's going to happen before then?
Well, I think Corinna's really in a better position than I, because she's done this stuff. And she was referring earlier to the judge's power. A lot of this has to do with the judge. My guess is that the trial is going to happen before the election.
So it's so funny that you mentioned that, Bob, because in my little mind's eye, I was like, oh, I can't wait to hear what he has to say about this, because I have no idea.
So you got the ball.
That's why we have an expert.
Hey, you're the professor, not I.
Well, you're a professor too. I think it's really, it is really interesting. I feel like that's one of the hardest questions. I mean, the whole thing we've had to say numerous times. We're surmising. We don't know.
Yeah.
This is just, what we can add to the conversation based on what we do know. But I think that's the hardest question of all. One thing we know for sure, Trump will try to push this out as far as possible. And Jack Smith has already stated his intention for a speedy trial. So, I mean, that much we know, but where those skirmishes over the timing, how that plays out,
You know,
I bet there's somebody betting. I bet somebody's putting money on this somewhere.
I'm sure.
Just the timing.
Where I right outside D.C. is the court, part of the Eastern District of Virginia Federal Court, and it's often called the Rocket Docket.
Rocket docket.
And I've actually heard that in Florida, that particular court that this judge is on is also a very fast docket. So it may mean that that actually may have been another consideration of Mr. Smith, that that in D.C. that's a very full docket, and it's hard to move things along there. That probably isn't true in, what is this, the Southern District of Florida? Is that the district?
What it is.
I'm guessing, but they may have a relatively cleaner docket, which means this thing really could get to trial quite quickly. And I don't think it's going to take a whole lot to get a jury impaneled.
I mean, that is the other question, isn't it? Because I mean, do you think so? I wondered, how long will it take to get a jury impaneled? It could take a couple months, don't you think?
No,
Do you think go faster?
Could, but I think not. I mean, people are going to say, you know, quite a standard question. Do you know who the defendant is? Well, duh. But you know, it's often not that hard. It's shockingly easy to find people that don't know anything about cases.
All right, fair point. And I suppose, you know, what I keep thinking of is qualifying a jury in a capital case and how long that can take.
Yeah.
But yeah, I bet you're right.
You haven't talked about, neither of you's talked about possible sentences.
Well, let's go.
I'd like to hear your thoughts.
Well, these are all felonies.
Yeah.
And each document is a separate felony. So, I mean, I would think that almost any and by the way, I think if he's convicted, he has to be sentenced to jail. I don't.
Jail or prison?
Sorry?
Jail or prison?
Prison.
Yeah.
Federal prison.
I mean, I think it's
now maybe the summer camp at Allentown, but contrary to what people think, that's still not that pleasant. And NAUTA won't be able to serve every one of Trump's needs there. But I don't see how it could be anything less than 10 or 20 years.
Wow. Yeah, you know, because the, you know, so with that Teixeira case that just came out yesterday. So we're recording this on Friday. So on Thursday, yesterday, you know, there was a report that he's been indicted, but he's already been serving prison time for those Discord leaks. You know.
Yes.
And you know, when you think about him, when you think about other folks like Reality Winner, you know, who had just a one document. You know, I mean, it's when a lot of the politicians are saying, "Oh yeah, there's like two different justice systems in this country," and I'm like, "Yeah, of course there is." You know, like because Trump is running free, he's out doing rallies. You know, like.
But you notice that's another, I think, very clever part of the indictment. You notice that there was a paragraph or two in which Trump is quoted railing against of classified information.
Yeah.
That was also done purposefully.
No, I loved that whole section.
Yeah.
In part, I don't know. In part, I mean, it serves a legitimate purpose. He absolutely knew what the obligations were. He appreciated the seriousness of them. But there was this other part where I was like, oh, they have a sense of humor. You know, there's this little piece where, you know, Trump is always opposite day. You know, lock her up becomes like, oh my gosh, are we, you know? And when they talk about, you know, being politically motivated and this not being a fair justice system, I do think like anybody else would have been arrested, been,
absolutely.
you know, like it's been unfair
and probably denied bail.
Opposite way.
Smith doesn't. I mean, you're right. Parts of it do appear to have some irony, although I tell you, when you look at Smith, he doesn't look like Mr. Chuckles to me.
No, he's not. No, he's not. I just thought it was clever
Yeah,
and
yeah, agreed.
um, for long. I mean, this brings us full circle. I don't know where we are in timing, so maybe this is a good place to kind of sum it up. But
Yeah.
forever law professors and courtroom scholars, people who study the courtroom, just talk about the power of storytelling.
Yes.
And the power of narrative, and that's, I mean, that part of Trump saying this is really important. You can't have someone in the White House who doesn't understand this, and all of these things just go into that show don't tell type of storytelling that they just did incredibly well for an indictment.
I absolutely agree with you. When I used to teach brief writing in my law firm to young associates, I used to say to them, look, pretend you're at a bar with an intelligent friend who's not a lawyer, and and tell the story of whatever case you're working on, because that's what good storytellers do. That they don't come out and start talking about res ipsa loquitur and collateral estoppel and all that other crap. They tell a story, and the story you either find gripping or dull, and you don't want to find it dull.
Law students and probably others as well are going to study this indictment for years to come.
Agreed.
That's really cool. Well, thanks again, Bob, for your time, your expertise, your humor, and finally your image.
Yes, and let's not forget the tie.
The tie, yes.
The tie's so good.
Yes. When and if the trial is over, I may call you back to see if all of your pontificating and predictions came true.
You're going to wait that long to invite me back? But Corinna gets invited all the time.
I don't.
No, what am I, chopped liver?
I don't.
I mean, unless like, there's another indictment of Trump, and I don't know if that'll happen,
Oh, well, it
can't
could
imagine what that's for.
Clearly, he's going to be exonerated in Fulton County. Clearly, with the reopening of the Eugene Carroll case, he'll walk free from that. I mean, so I don't really see him.
The ABA ought to provide an award for Trump for supporting lawyers. And in fact, they ought to name a courthouse after him, just because he's been so helpful to billable hours.
I have to say, there was something I just saw online, maybe it was Twitter, but it was like a Law and Order special Trump edition. I don't know if you saw that, but it's like got the players, and I just laughed out loud. I was like, yeah, right?
So
like
funny.
This could be a little TV show drama.
Yeah.
Oh, dear.
That's awesome. Well, thanks again to both you guys and to our listeners and viewers. We will see you all next week.
It was a pleasure, Will,
Thanks
as
so
always.
much.
All right, thanks.
Thank you.